What is the most embarrassing way your body has betrayed you? Story 1. In 6th grade, my best friend and I hung out on the front steps of my apartment complex with 2 guys we were totally into. I sat at the top step with my bestie while the 2 guys goofed around farther down, keeping us in stitches. I couldn't help but burst into laughter. It was one of those laugh till you can't breathe moments where you're making no sound, completely losing control, and then out came this really loud fart. I was beyond embarrassed, but I just couldn't stop laughing. It escalated, and before I knew it, I was also wetting my pants uncontrollably. It was a mess. It was streaming down the steps while I desperately tried to stifle my laughter by covering my ears and squeezing my eyes shut. Eventually, I managed to regain control and stop laughing, but the damage was done. My crush came over to sit beside me, and just as he was about to, he spotted the puddle of whiz. He leaped up in surprise, exclaiming, "Whoa!" I hurriedly tried to dash inside, but I'd forgotten my keys. So there I was, ringing the buzzer, waiting for my mom to let me in, all while standing there with soaked pants and a huge puddle of whiz cascading down half the steps, right in front of them. I stayed indoors for the rest of the day, utterly mortified, but miraculously that night, my crush returned and asked me out through my bedroom window. That's so crazy, man. But she's still lucky. Boys still liked her after that embarrassing vibe check. Story 2. I had an accident in class during my first year of college. I was wearing a skirt without tights. The lecture lasted a daunting 4 hours and I held it in as long as humanly possible, but at some point, I was absolutely certain I'd have an accident the moment I stood up. Excusing myself to the bathroom was out of the question. I'd have embarrassed myself in front of everyone in the way, so I stayed put. I waited, hoping the other students would leave, but they lingered, asking the professor questions. Eventually, I made my way out of the classroom miraculously, but as soon as I stepped through the door, I couldn't hold it any longer. I knelt down, pretending to rummage through my bag. Someone even asked me if I was okay, praying that nobody would notice the puddle forming at my feet. I kept up the charade of searching my bag for another 5 agonizing minutes until everyone was gone. Then I hurried to the nearest bathroom to try and clean up as best as I could. I went home, changed my underwear, and used a hairdryer to dry my skirt and shoes because returning with different clothes might raise suspicions. Strangely, no one ever mentioned it. Even now, I wonder if someone noticed but chose not to mention it out of kindness, or if by some miracle, I managed to keep it hidden. Story 3. My grandmother tragically lost her life after contracting the virus through a blood transfusion years ago. If you're in Minnesota and receiving a blood transfusion, my grandma was the reason hospitals now screen blood. We honor her memory by donating blood on her birthday. Personally, I dread donating blood. Needles, the sight of blood, and that chilly sensation in your entire arm, not my cup of tea. Ironically, I happen to have universal blood that's CMV negative. Apparently rare, I can donate to babies and small children. Hospitals always seem to be short on supply, as I'm constantly called to donate double the usual amount whenever I'm eligible. I charge them twice as many cookies as they give others. Once after giving that double dose, I felt surprisingly fine. Normally, I'd feel wiped out and need to crash, but not that day. I arrived home and my wife was there. We were feeling a bit playful considering we were trying to have a child, so we went for it. I started undressing when suddenly my knees buckled. The room spun and I collapsed to the floor. I never lost consciousness. I was just sprawled out and unable to move my arms or legs, only able to move my head. Lesson learned, trying to be romantic after donating a double dose of blood is a real no-go. Story 4. Living with IBS, certain food makes my stomach swell up with gas like there's a basketball under my skin. My boyfriend knew about my condition, but hadn't witnessed the worst of it until one day at my place. I had my classic gas belly and excused myself to my room to ease the discomfort. As I lay on the bed, knees up, trying to coax out the gas, he decided to come in to show me something on his phone. I'm laughing, trying to signal him to leave as I sense a monumental release building up. Amidst the laughter in my awkward position, I couldn't hold it back. The loudest, most extended fart in history escapes. At first, he laughs in surprise, but as it continues, his face shifts from laughter to shock with a hint of sadness. I can't help but laugh even more, prolonging the fart. For what feels like an eternity, he steps out, covering his mouth. When he returns, my epic fart is ending with a final toot toot toot. He's speechless. His first words, "I feel like I've lived a lifetime and returned from the dead before that fart ended. I just can't imagine how it lasted so long and steady." And then it turned all Louis Armstrong at the end. That's how we coined certain trumpety farts as Louis. Surprisingly, a few months later, we moved in together, so obviously, my butt's performance didn't scare him off too much. I guess that guy actually liked her funky trumpet solo. If you think this woman's story was embarrassing, you won't believe what happens in Story 7. It's super cringe. Story 5. Back in my 4th year of high school, I sat next to a stunning girl. Naturally, I had a bit of a crush, but my chances were dashed from day one. It was in a strict class where silence reigned, especially during tests, but my issue wasn't about having an unexpected tent in my pants. Only in this class, beside this girl, did my body decide to perform its own symphony of absurd noises.
My stomach would growl ferociously for no apparent reason, and my throat made all sorts of strange gurgling sounds when I swallowed. Sometimes I'd even battle intense gas, desperately trying to stifle any eruptions to spare this poor girl from my bodily symphony, but my stomach would retaliate with angry rumbles whenever I attempted to suppress it. The noises were just audible enough for the girl and anyone on the other side to hear this chaotic orchestra within me. My response was often a nervous laugh followed by an embarrassed, sorry. Trying to cover it with a cough only made it more conspicuous. Then there were the times when the seats were too snug and the tables were too small for everyone. This led to constant adjustments below the belt. There are only so many times you can discreetly readjust before people catch on that you're not just searching for gum or a pen. To that lady, if you're reading this, I apologize. I truly had no other option. Nevertheless, that bizarre symphony haunted only that particular classroom. It's a phenomenon I've never encountered elsewhere. I am convinced my English literature grade suffered slightly due to the energy I spent trying to contain all that noise. Story 6. Experiencing a random tent in my pants, something I think most guys can relate to on some level. Once on the school bus ride home, it happened to me. Astonishingly, it occurred during the fleeting 15 seconds in the day when I wasn't even thinking about anything remotely related to the topic. It just shot up, towering like the start of Breath of the Wild and refused to go down. I watched my stop drawing nearer by the second. 4 stops away. 3, 2. I wished for a nettle leaf to magically knock it down. No matter how hard I tried to distract myself with thoughts of random objects or unsightly government ministers, it remained steadfast, enduring all the wind and rain I could mentally throw at it. In the end, I had to get off and attempt to conceal it with my art folder. My best efforts fell short, and I was far from cool enough to casually brush it off. Let's just say that year was quite eventful after that incident. Of course, the moment I stepped off the bus, it wilted away faster than ice cream under Sauron's gaze. It was truly an embarrassing moment that stuck with me. Story 7. My girlfriend and I headed out one night to our favorite local bar that hosts a wing night every week. It's not only our top spot, but also one of the few bars open all winter in our beach town. Given the popularity of wing night, we had to wait for a table for quite a while. Normally, we'd have just 1 beer each on a weeknight, but that night, as we waited, we ended up having a lot more. So after several beers, some spicy wings, and a night of it all settling, the next day my system needed an urgent release. Unfortunately, the timing was terrible. I was at work with only my boss and the head of all offices in my state, 5 offices, present. I had one of the biggest dumps of my life, and to my horror, it resulted in the worst toilet clog I've ever created. Despite 20 minutes of plunging, I had to admit defeat. It was embarrassing, but I had to inform my boss, who happens to be quite attractive. She called several plumbers, but none were available that day. I tried another 15 minutes of plunging, hoping to resolve it, but no luck. In the end, with just 1 toilet in the office, we had no choice but to leave early. The plumber arrived the following morning and managed to clear the blockage. Long story short, my indulgence in too many wings and beers resulted in a $150 expense for the company to unclog a toilet. Bro's digestive system went into overdrive and produced a legendary dump. Story 8. Experiencing my first period after having my son was pretty embarrassing. For those unaware, it can come at any time postpartum. I had it at 9 months postpartum with my daughter and at 11 months after having my son. This time around, it was notably heavy. I recall a visit to the pediatrician's office with my daughter when I started feeling the most dreadful cramps. At first, I didn't quite recognize them for what they were, mainly because my focus was on my daughter. We went into the doctor's office, had a conversation, and then stood up as they needed to examine her on the bed. Suddenly, I heard a hesitant voice. Frau Vesparia, I think you have a little problem. I turned around, and to my dismay, the once lovely light green chair I had occupied was no longer light green. It wasn't just a small stain. It seemed as though my uterus had made a grand offering to the fertility gods. There I was, in jeans, mortified and having to explain that it was the onset of my first period after childbirth. The doctor was very understanding and discreetly handed me a pad. I hurriedly made my way to the toddler's toilet to try and salvage the situation. As I left the room, my face matched the color of my now red jeans. I caught sight of a nurse armed with cleaning supplies heading into the room. To this day, the memory still makes me cringe with embarrassment. Story 9. I once went to school feeling really sick, and within 10 minutes of being there, my stomach started cramping. I quickly informed the teacher I needed to go home. The trip back, about a 10-minute bike ride, became excruciating. Every little bump intensified the pain in my stomach. Just as I started biking toward my house, after barely 2 minutes, I had to stop abruptly and ended up barfing and horribly messing up my pants. Some of my friends passed by in cars, but I don't think they noticed me. I called my dad, who couldn't pick me up, but he did have a scooter. He arrived, and despite my condition, I explained that I couldn't go home on the bike. He insisted there was no other option, so with soiled pants, I reluctantly got on the bike and we drove home together. Story 10. While unwell once, I rushed to the toilet to throw up. But as I began, a simultaneous unwelcome event occurred. I started to have a rather unfortunate bowel movement. Once the barfing started, there was no stopping until it ran its course. So there I was, in the most uncomfortable and pungent 5 minutes of my life, throwing up and dealing with the other issue. Since that incident, My ability to throw up without the accompanying side effects has been compromised. I'm always anxious about potentially having a similar experience, so I adopt a less comfortable position in the toilet with a bucket, despite knowing it makes throwing up harder. Well, I hope this trip down memory lane was as memorable for you as it was for me. Wow, this guy's like a twin-headed dragon. One end spewing lava and the other is dropping stink bombs. If you laughed so hard at these people's worst fails, don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe to my channel. I've got more funny stories lined up for you. Story 11. In 6th grade, I unleashed the most lethal, eye-watering fart. The teacher, with some kind of mystical intuition, pinpointed me the culprit and promptly booted me out of class. Her verdict? I had to be unwell to emit such a toxic cloud. Oddly enough, I found it kind of cool to get out of school early. And to my surprise, my dad found the whole situation utterly hilarious. Story 12. In 6th grade, I got a tent up in my pants for no reason and then was asked to go hand something to the teacher. When I stood up, this girl who sat near me stared right at my pants with wide eyes. I'm just thankful she didn't tell anyone, or I might not have heard the end of it. Story 13. In a 2-hour train ride, I felt the air building up slowly in my gut, but I managed to hold it until the very end. As the train approached my stop, I stood up and headed toward the door, still containing that now substantial amount of air in my colon. Right as the doors were about to open, a child accidentally bumped into me from behind, catching me off guard. In that split moment of surprise, I lost control. The outcome? The loudest, most unpleasant fart imaginable. I've never bolted out of a train station faster in my entire life. Story 14. I stood up at work and suddenly screamed in pain because of a cramp behind my neck. Hard to explain, but that's exactly where I felt it. My coworkers burst into laughter when I tried to explain the reason behind my scream. Story 15. Last summer, I stumbled over something while walking on the sidewalk. It's no big deal since it happens occasionally, usually resulting in a funny little skip or stumble. However, this time was different. I sort of leaped forward into the air, but the usual reflex to extend my hands forward didn't quite happen. Instead, I just plummeted to the ground like a sack of potatoes. It was both painful and embarrassing, and to this day, I'm confused about how that even occurred. Sounds like this guy just experienced the Skyrim ragdoll bug in real life. Those are the times you wish you had cat-like reflexes. Story 16. Once I let out 3 audible but not particularly loud farts within about 40 minutes while at a girl's place. Each time I apologized and she reassured me it was okay, but I could tell she was taken aback. I couldn't control it. It was like my rear end decided to perform a serious defense move on me that day. We haven't really spoken since then, and considering we're still neighbors and bump into each other a few times a month, our interactions are limited to a simple hi and that's about it. Story 17. On our second date while cooking dinner for my now wife, I had a bit of gas pressure that I thought I could release discreetly. Well, I was mistaken. It wasn't terrible and didn't have a strong smell, but certainly, letting one out wasn't on the agenda for the evening. I just shrugged, glanced at her, and quipped, "Oh, wow, it's way too early in this relationship for that. I'm so sorry." She laughed it off and didn't make a big deal out of it. Fast forward nearly 15 years and we're still together. Story 18. During a meeting with my managers, they're airing grievances about things I haven't achieved. X, Y, and Z. It's not that I'm upset by their criticisms. If anything, I'm irritated. I have to endure them. But for some strange reason, my eyes began watering. These weekly meetings always triggered this odd reaction. My eyes would well up and tears would start flowing. Strangely, it started occurring even when I wasn't particularly upset. Even in typical situations that might provoke anger, I never found myself tearing up. It was just during those meetings that this weird reaction occurred. Story 19. On my first date ever, we were at her house watching a movie and my nerves were off the charts, causing some serious discomfort as gas built up in my gut. The bathroom was next to her room, so using it would have sounded like a machine gun going off. I did my best to hold it in. About halfway through the movie, my gut had other plans and let out a massive one. The girl acted cool about it, but she never messaged me again after that. Looking back, it's kind of funny. Story 20. Years ago, I attended a music event where day drinking was the norm. As I was leaving, the lines for the portable toilets were incredibly long. I made the decision to hold it in until I reached my apartment. The train ride was mostly okay, but by the time I reached my stop, I was in dire need of a bathroom. I still had a 10-minute walk ahead, but I was determined to make it by walking as fast as possible. Upon reaching my front door, relief washed over me, believing I'd made it in time. However, I was on the brink of bursting. So I hurried inside and dashed to the bathroom. Just as I was undoing my zipper, I lost control and started to take a whiz. I was literally standing in front of my toilet and yet still managed to have an accident. Fortunately, no one was around, but I'm still incredibly embarrassed by that incident. Dang, dude was so close to the finish line. He should have known better than to hold it in. Story 21. Uncontrollable flatulence struck me during a moment of silence at work, meant to honor the sacrifices of World War II. There's nothing quite like being urged to join in a reflective silence to empathize and remember the tragedies of war, all while my body was emphatically adding its own sounds, interrupting my colleagues' reflections with unexpected noises from my rear end. Story 22. At the water park, my period unexpectedly showed up. I didn't realize it until I stepped out of the wave pool and heard a kid scream, "Mommy, there's red stuff in the water!" I looked back and saw a noticeable blood trail leading straight to me. In a hurry, I made a beeline for the showers, discovering a huge stain on my cover-up. After about 30 minutes, I casually walked out of the showers, fully dressed, my swimsuit and cover-up cleaned out and discreetly wrapped in my towel. The wave pool had been closed down and lifeguards working to clean the water of any trace. A group of kids stayed by the pool's edge, many complaining loudly. My mom gave me a look as I shuffled back to our chairs, but she didn't say anything. Since then, I've definitely gotten better at managing my cycle. Story 23. I danced classical ballet for years when I was younger. One day we were doing a stretch where we lay on our backs or backsides against the wall, and our legs stretched toward the ceiling. The goal was to let our legs fall into the splits, using gravity to help us. As we lay there listening to soft piano music, my legs were open and the girl next to me was whispering jokes, making me giggle. I could sense an imminent explosion of gas. By being young and foolish, I hesitated to close my legs, fearing I might get into trouble. That's when I let out the loudest, most terrifying fart imaginable. I swear it felt like it blew a hole in my little pink leotard. The room, a vast wooden studio, seemed to amplify the monstrous fart, bouncing it off of the walls for what felt like 15 minutes. While the little girl started screaming, I was screaming, and I'm fairly certain the teacher was screaming too. It still gives me nightmares to this day. Story 24. When I was young and just getting the hang of dealing with my period, I was so naive and wore white shorts to a theme park. And, well, let's just say it didn't end well for the shorts. Our friend's dad spotted it. Oh, the horror for a teenage girl. And while he was pretty respectful and nice, the memory still makes me cringe whenever I think about it. Story 25. Honestly, entirely my own fault, but I had a night of excessive drinking followed by a 3-hour train ride the next morning while completely hungover and nauseous. During the train journey, the urge to throw up hit me again, so I stood up to move to the onboard toilet. This new, modern, fancy train had automatic doors for the toilet, and I couldn't figure out where the button was to close them. I was frantically trying to locate it while suppressing my urge to barf as much as possible. A sweet old lady seated near the toilets noticed my struggle and pointed out the button to me. I thanked her, closed the door, and relieved myself. It was very audible. I didn't dare look at her in the eye as I walked by, consumed by shame. That lady was a lifesaver. The stench would have been unbearable if they hadn't reached the toilet in time. You've reached the end of the video, but don't worry, I've got more stories coming your way. Go check out What's the Most Embarrassing Thing Your Kid Did in Public? Story 3 was priceless. See you there.